This is the New Balance Ellipse, a shoe that looks like a 1080, weighs about the same as a 1080, and uses FreshFoamX, just like the 1080 used to use. So while the 1080 seems to have moved on to a new foam, is the Ellipse a nod to the way things were? It's time to lace up the Ellipse and take it for a ride. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a not only runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys about the all new New Balance Ellipse. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that New Balance sent to me for the purpose of review, so I didn't have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the New Balance Ellipse, and let's start with the specs. This is a 37.9 millimeter stack height shoe in the heel with an 8 millimeter drop, giving us 29.9 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. These are just some really weird numbers that New Balance is throwing out here. Usually brands don't give us increments of 0.1 millimeters in terms of their stack heights. Usually we get whole numbers or maybe a 0.5, but here we've got 37.9 in the heel. And the foam that we have in this shoe is FreshFoamX. And now FreshFoamX is a foam that we're very familiar with if you've been running in New Balance shoes. It's a foam they've been using in a while in kind of half of their shoes. New Balance has two different kind of lineups of shoes. They've got fuel cell shoes, and we got FreshFoamX shoes. The FreshFoamX shoes are intended to be more of their kind of regular daily trainer type of shoes, everyday kinds of shoes. While it can mean a lot of different compounds, and while those compounds themselves can further be tweaked to give very specific kinds of experiences depending on the type of shoe that they're making, overall, what New Balance tells me is when they're using FreshFoamX or putting that FreshFoamX label onto a shoe, what they're trying to convey is an experience, a softness, a cushion in the shoe that's also still going to be suitable for everyday daily training, so it can put in work while also being comfy. Now, on the outsole, we have a very familiar looking pattern to protect all that FreshFoamX foam. We've got these fingers of rubber, or the other way to look at it is like there's these rubber drips, like a candle wax dripping down on the front of the shoe. And then we've got two skids of rubber with that outline of rubber filled in on the outer edge of the heel, an area where people tend to have a little bit more harder wear on the shoe. So there's a little bit more rubber back there. Up top, we have an engineered mesh with a lot of reflective accents. There's not a lot of other kind of overlays necessarily on the shoe, but there are these reflective hints and the reflective tape that kind of outlines the design of this shoe. The laces are a little bit stretchy. The tongue has a little bit of padding, nothing too crazy, which is something that I like to see. And then there is a light to moderate amount of padding through this heel cup, which has a little bit of structure, but it's not super firm and dense. I went with my usual running shoe size, and that worked out really well for me on this shoe. If anything, I felt like the shoe had a lot of volume in the toe, so there was plenty of space both width-wise and height-wise in the toe box. And overall, this shoe comes in at a respectable weight, straddling the line between regular daily trainer and max cushion shoe. It's kind of somewhere in between, more of like a cushioned daily trainer or a grand touring version of a daily trainer, coming in at a measured weight of 9.2 ounces or 262 grams. Now that we talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. The New Balance Ellipse is a pleasant daily trainer. It's not too soft, but it's not too firm. It's not exactly a Goldilocks shoe because I don't think it can quite do it all, but it does have quite a bit of versatility to it. I feel like the step-in comfort on this is exceptionally nice. So for a casual shoe, I think that this is going to be really comfortable for a lot of people. I also think it looks great. So I think for casual wear or a shoe that you're going to do a little bit of running in, but also want to be able to wear it around a little bit, I think that this shoe is going to be excellent for that. And for running, I think that it's most comfortable when you're midfoot or heel striking. The way that they've used the FreshFoamX foam and shaped the geometry geometry of the shoe back there makes it feel really nice if that is the first point of contact for you. I do feel like overall though, as you're transitioning from heel to toe, that the shoe feels very flat. It doesn't have quite as much of a camber to the shoe as some other more modern shoes might have. And what I mean by that is that a lot of shoes these days have a bevel in the back and also more of a bevel in the front, or a rocker in the front. And what that does is it helps you kind of wrangle all of the midsole foam that you have here. As shoes have gotten taller and taller, we need different kind of geometric or chemical techniques in terms of adjusting and tinkering with foams to make it so that we can still find these shoes to be runnable. And I think one of the ways that New Balance has tried to approach that is by giving the shoe an 8mm drop instead of the 6mm drop that is pretty, I think, standard across most of the FreshFoamX shoes in the lineup. And so that certainly helps by having a taller drop. But I also still feel like sometimes the shoe is a bit blocky, a little bit slappy, if you will, when I'm running at my very easy paces in the shoe. And I wish that the shoe had just a little bit more camber to it. I mean, this shoe looks like it's pretty cambered. It looks like the toes kind of pick up off the top edge of the table, but I feel like I need a little bit more, maybe a little bit earlier. But because it doesn't have that, I'm getting a very kind of old school feel of the shoe. So people who have not been liking the direction that running shoes have been going lately might find this to be really refreshing, almost like a blast from the past. I do think that the foam in here is nice though, and even for people who are midfoot, forefoot strikers, which is how I would characterize myself, I think can get along really well with it. I think it takes a little bit more effort to stay on the forefoot, but once you do, the foam is really nice. Now, the one thing that I'll say is, even though I like the sense of softness, but also responsiveness that I'm getting from the foam, it feels like a nice foam. It feels like something that's absorbing impact from the road. It doesn't feel like it's hurting my feet. I do feel like afterward, my body notices that I just went for a little bit of a run. So one thing that I am going to keep in mind as I continue my testing of the shoe beyond this initial review is, how does my body respond to it? I feel like I can get faster in this shoe, but is the shoe helping me get to that speedier pace, or is my body paying a little bit more for that speed? That's one thing that I'm going to keep in mind, because as these stand now, I do feel like it's putting a little bit of extra wear on me rather than the shoe absorbing it when I'm trying to run a little bit faster. But I am trying to recognize that this is my first shoe review that I'm doing after my big race in the desert, which wasn't that long ago. So while the shoe is giving me a lot during the run, I'm wondering right now if the shoe is perhaps missing a little bit of something that makes it easier for me to get from this run to the next one tomorrow. But overall, I feel like the shoe is pretty neutral. The fit is very comfortable, and the shoe is lightweight enough that I can reach for the shoe pretty much on every day, whether it's recovery run or doing an up-tempo steady run. And the shoe reminds me a lot of the 1080, which is a shoe that has been extremely popular, one of the flagships from New Balance. So I feel like we're getting a lot of those similar sensations and use cases in that shoe in the Ellipse in a very good way. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The New Balance Ellipse is an accessible daily trainer that is big on style, but also can back it up with substance to support and power your everyday runs. New Balance wants $140 for this shoe, and I think that's a really good price for what you're getting here. And I think that it can make the New Balance Ellipse one of two really great entry points to New Balance shoes if you are new to the brand. This shoe goes on sale for most of the world on March 5th, but it's going to take another 2 weeks before it reaches North America. So we're looking at March 19th as the drop date for this shoe. But before we talk about some alternatives to the New Balance Ellipse, I think we got to talk about some of the alternatives that exist within New Balance first. Now, we've already been talking a lot about the 1080 pretty much all day in this video. And I think that this is the first point of comparison that I think we need to make. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the Ellipse that draws from the 1080, and in a lot of ways I feel like this is kind of a bizarro 1080. Like the 1080 version 15 switched to a new foam, Infineon, and I do really like this Infineon foam, but I feel like for some of you that don't like change and love it when the shoe brands don't change your shoes at all, I feel like the New Balance Ellipse is the 1080 that you are really looking for. For me personally, I like the changes to the 1080. I like the Infineon foam, and the upper is just much more premium in the 1080 version 15. The padding is really comfortable without being excessive. The ways that the upper material has those inlays and the embossed portions of the material make it feel really premium, really nice. Even the overlays that are on this shoe, they are very minimal, but those overlays are just a nicer material of overlay than kind of the almost stickers and tape that we're getting on the New Balance Ellipse. If you don't care about all those flourishes, I'd say definitely save a bunch of money and go with the New Balance Ellipse. But if you've been a long time 1080 fan and you like the premium nature of this shoe, it's kind of like a flagship extra ultra premium daily trainer, then I'd say you're gonna stick with the 1080. Although this shoe is now $170, which is $5 more than it was last year. A nice little tariff tax bump increase for you guys there built into this shoe. So is it $30 better than an Ellipse? I don't really think it is, unless you are a 1080 super fan. But I do think that the much closer call is going to be the last 1080 that had FreshFoamX foam in it, and that's the 1080 version 14. So we're going a version back, and I think this is a much more difficult comparison to make between these two shoes, because if the Ellipse is the 1080 for FreshFoamX lovers, this is a 1080 with FreshFoamX in it. And I think that here we're seeing kind of like, what's the difference that we're getting when we are cutting costs to get to the 140 of the Ellipse? Because the 1080 version 14 retailed at $165, and that's the price the 1080's been for a little bit before Tariff King got involved. And so what we're getting in this is still, we're getting that very premium upper. We're getting a little bit more padding and puffiness in it. And we are getting what feels to me like a nicer version of FreshFoamX foam. It's a little bit more dense. It's not collapsing quite as much. So my bigger, taller friends are definitely going to want to look at the 1080 version 14. And I feel like some of those geometry things that we were talking about, it's the 6mm drop versus the 8mm drop, coupled with some rocker and geometry bevels that make the shoe a little bit easier to live with, especially at some of those really chill paces. And overall, I feel like the way that I would differentiate these two shoes is that the Ellipse is lighter and I think a little bit more agile, a little bit more speed oriented, where the 1080 version 14 is a little bit more chill and a little bit more relaxed, although the overlap between these two shoes is substantial. I think the main way that I differentiate between these two shoes is on price, because if you're looking for a FreshFoamX alternative to the 1080 version 15, I think the 1080 version 14 is the better shoe that you're going to look at. And because it's been out for a long time, and because there's already a version 15 that is replacing it, if you can still find them in your size, you can get them at a really nice discount of $90. So under $100 for a flagship level shoe, I feel like is a opportunity that's going to be really hard to pass up. So pick that one up while you can, and then when you need to replace that one, then you can bump up to the Ellipse. But there's still one other shoe that we need to talk about, actually two other shoes we need to talk about from New Balance before we move on to other brands, because I feel like the Ellipse is and you see this a lot when you have like budget shoes, it kind of borrows from a lot of places in terms of, I don't know if it makes it easier to make or easier to design or what it is, but when I look at the outsole of the Ellipse, it doesn't look like, I mean, it kind of looks like the outsole of the 1080 version 15, and it kind of looks like the outsole of the 1080 version 14, but it really looks like the outsole to the 880. Now, between 880 and 1080 in New Balance used to only have, well, not only, but a lot of their shoes had numbers on it. And the numbering system kind of worked in two ways. There's the first number, 8 or 10, and then the second number. 80 indicated that it was kind of a performance model. 60 and 40 are different layers of stability. So that kind of helps you parse what's going on with New Balance shoes. And then the 8 meant like everyday running. And then the 10 meant like more technology, more comfort, more stuff in it, more luxurious, more expensive. And so that's kind of how New Balance has always been looking at the 880 versus the 1080. They're both daily trainers. 880 is like a regular daily trainer. The 1080 is more of a luxurious grand touring model. I've always kind of thought of it as the max cushion shoe, but now they have a different max cushion shoe. So it's kind of in that in between. It's like a cushioned daily trainer. But the 880 has a lot of the same things that's going on in both the 1080 version 14 and also what's going on in the Ellipse. Not only are the outsole patterns almost identical here, they're both using FreshFoamX foam. They both have very similar stack heights. This has a 6mm drop though, and they're using a moderate amount of cushion. But again, in the 880, there's a little bit more padding and the upholstery is a lot nicer. The upper's a lot nicer. The overlays are a lot nicer. So you're getting a little bit more premiumness than what you're getting in the, I guess, I don't want to call it a budget model because it's still $140. You're getting some of those things where you're cutting costs just a little bit. And so I feel like these two shoes are a much closer match in terms of overlap. Now the 880 version 15 changed quite a bit from version 14. The 880 has always been kind of a workhorse, almost like low to the ground, flat, very old school type of running shoe, which again makes me think about what's going on in the Ellipse. But the 880 version 15 got a lot taller, a lot more dense. It's a very different kind of 880, substantial departure. Just like the 1080 was a substantial departure from what the 1080 has been, the 880 was an even bigger departure. So for 880 fans who are upset about the 15, again, I'd have you look at the Ellipse. And these two shoes are coming in at similar prices. The 880 definitely got a tariff bump. It's at $150 now, and I think that's expensive for what you're getting in that shoe. The Ellipse, I think, is going to be the option if you are unhappy with the direction of the 880. But I think when we're talking about New Balance daily trainers, I think we can't leave without talking about the Rebel. Now, this is a fuel cell shoe, not FreshFoamX. And generally, when I review shoes, I don't like to talk about alternatives within a brand or outside a brand that are different. But this one is worth talking about because this shoe retails at $145. Again, it has a tariff bump increase. It should be $140. But it is one of my favorite shoes, one of my favorite shoes overall in the year that it came out. And I absolutely love the versatility of the shoe, the styling of the shoe, and the experience of the shoe. And at $5 more, I'd say all day I'd go with the Rebel version 5, but it is a very different kind of experience. The compression of the foam, the decompression of the foam is very different. So you're getting something very different here, but I feel like as we're looking at kind of entry points, I mentioned there's two possible really great entry points for New Balance. The Ellipse is one, the Rebel 5 is the other, and personally for what I prefer, I'd go with the Rebel. Okay, now let's take a look outside the brand to see what the competition has to offer in terms of where the Ellipse stacks up. And I think the first shoe that I want to take a look at is a shoe that I normally look at when I'm looking at the 1080. And this is from Nike. This is the Vomero. And like the 1080, the Vomero is a shoe that I've always wanted to be like a real max cushion shoe, but the brand has always wanted it to be kind of like a plush or luxurious Grand Touring type of version of the daily trainer. So it's kind of like a Pegasus Grand Touring is how the Vomero has typically been treated by Nike in the past. And I think we're getting a lot of that same stuff here, but in terms of how this shoe lines up against the Ellipse, I think that in a shoe rotation, in a lineup, if you put it on an org chart, I think that these two shoes occupy very similar spaces, but they work very differently. The Vomero has a lot more plush padding, so like it's been pushing towards that max cushion direction. You can see how puffy the tongue is, puffy the heel cup is, and even the upper material is a little bit thicker and softer. It's more about overall comfort. And so I think that this lines up probably better with a 1080 than the Ellipse. But if you're looking at the Ellipse, I think that it also bears consideration to look at the Vomero. In terms of ride experience, the Vomero is a 10mm heel drop, so it's an even more aggressive position of the heel versus the toes than the Ellipse is, and the fit is going to be a lot more snug in the Vomero because after all, this is a Nike upper. Now the Vomero comes in at $165, so it's pricing itself right at where the 1080 should be, but because the Vomero 18 has been out for a while, it's now available at $125. So for me, between the Vomero 18 and the Ellipse, I'd say number one, you go by what kind of shoe do you want. The Vomero is a little bit more chill. I think the Ellipse can be a little bit more versatile and do a little bit more work. So that's one way I would decide. But the main thing that I would probably decide upon is how do you like your running shoes to fit? The Vomero fits quite snug. The Ellipse is almost on the too voluminous side as far as a standard width shoe goes. So that's probably the main way that I'd pick between these two. Although realistically, most people are going to pick between these two shoes on which one they think looks nicer. And then the other shoe that I think we need to talk about today comes from Brooks, and this is the Glycerin 23. Another shoe that I think kind of lines up better with the 1080, but I wanted to talk about it against the Ellipse because number one, I feel like the Ellipse is kind of a bizarro 1080, and two, the stack height on this shoe, the heel drop on this shoe are identical to what's going on in the Ellipse. I will say though that where I feel like the Ellipse might be a little bit rougher on the body in terms of the underfoot experience, the Glycerin goes the opposite direction and is really trying to insulate you from the road. The foam here is still pretty dense of a foam. I'd like for it to get squishier personally as a non-Glycerin fan, but I do feel like there is a great amount of cushion and shock absorption that's happening, and that's what's giving me that kind of like dense feeling, is that there isn't quite as much pop in this foam as I'm getting in the Ellipse. There's also much more comfort experience that is trying to be achieved here. The puffy tongue, the ample amount of padding all throughout the heel cup. It's a really nice step-in experience. I think that if you were to strip down a lot of the stuff in the Glycerin to give me like a leaner, meaner Glycerin, you'd probably end up with something very similar to an Ellipse. And between these two shoes, again, I'd pick on which kind of shoe do you want? What kind of comfort do you want in your shoe? Or do you want something a little bit more stripped down, no nonsense? Go with the Ellipse. If you want that extra comfort, go with the Glycerin. You're going to be paying for that one because this one, again, is priced like the 1080, retailing in at $175, which also is an inflated price. So those are my thoughts on the New Balance Ellipse. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it to the end of this too long video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?